Hey guys, my name's Nyssa Waters and I am the CEO of Being AI Customer Solutions. And I'm really, really excited to sit here with Caleb Perelini, emerging technologies researcher. And he had the glorious task of being sent over to, what was it, 44 degree heat?
44, 5?
45 degree heat in
Yeah.
Las Vegas to attend the AI4 Summit. So
Yeah.
we thought today we'd do a bit of a debrief to our customers around what we were seeing over in the States and any of the learnings that we had. So Caleb, give us a rundown on what actually the event was about.
Yeah, so AI4 is kind of North America's largest AI-specific conference. So I'd say, primarily focused towards business as opposed to a research or a tech conference. Funnily enough, it takes place the week after DEF CON. So you have all the nerds gathering.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So I actually met a lot of people who are overlapping between the two. So big business focus, enterprise focus, primarily looking at, how do we implement AI into organizations? What are organizations doing? What are use cases? What are some of the trends? It's an opportunity for companies to kind of show off what they're doing, for startups and VCs to come to. So just a huge forum, right? So all sorts of people speaking, showcasing what they're doing, talking about their experiences, and just a massive conference. I think probably 6,000 to 7,000 attendees in total, and that's without speakers and exhibitors. That's just attendees.
Yeah, I know from talking to you throughout the event, your mind was absolutely on fire and exploding by the end of each day. Very, very long days, lots and lots of sessions. What was probably the most profound trend that you saw emerging throughout that?
Yeah, so I think the biggest, and I suppose this is less a trend and more an observation, is that the US market, they're kind of beyond talking about AI as a thing they could do or a kind of far off idea or technology or an innovation. They're beyond that, really. A lot of
It's AI first. It's already there.
Yeah, it's already there.
Next.
It's just a given, right? It's in the market. It's in their organizations. It's in their business plans. So, where they're at in terms of maturity, they're thinking about strategy. They're thinking about how do we get the most ROI on what we do. How do we prepare for an agent-based future, right? How do we change productivity, efficiency? How do we create new products, right? New experiences for our customers, or at least for our for the things they do in their industry. So it's completely different to what we see perhaps in Australia and New Zealand, right? It's not a kind of far off, maybe let's wait and see. It's we want to not just compete. I think one of the biggest takeaways, this is a bit of an aside, but there was a quote I heard was, you're not going to be competing on who uses AI, it's how you use AI versus your competitors. And I think that was kind of the craziest thing to hear, is it's not that, AI is your competitive advantage, it's how do you use it.
Yeah, so it's, are you just using it as a chatbot or are you just using it internally? It's how you're actually using it to completely rethink the way your products are designed, products are built, your manufacturing processes, your engagements with your customers. It's actually rethinking everything as opposed to just this function.
Yeah, and but also that your competitors are going to do it as well, right? So how do you make sure your strategy is aligned with your organizational culture?
Right.
How do you make sure that you have the right, I suppose, what would you say, innovation conditions for it to work? So that was the other thing, and that leads me on to the kind of second big trend, was how do you create AI centers of excellence within companies, right? How do you make sure that AI projects are successful, and what are the things that make them different to other kinds of innovation that you might do in your company? So one good talk I went to talked about having what they called bake-offs. We have a small constrained team that has the resources and the, I suppose, permission to make a small rapid prototype of an AI project within a week. And they just do that week on week on week on if they have the capacity, and then just see what sticks. And what they said is there will be some things that are just a nail it and scale it solution where the opportunity is really obvious. And then there are some that are green shoots, which perhaps, you start with something small that looks promising, but may take a little bit longer. And it may take, getting it into the hands of customers, experimenting a bit, But most importantly is having the tolerance for these things.
Yeah, it's the permission to fail sometimes,
Totally,
right?
absolutely.
And I know we do that a lot within our business, but you don't shut down any idea, but
No.
you try it, and if it's not working, you've got to shut it down eventually.
Absolutely.
And accept that it's sometimes going to be a failure, and you learn from those failures. And I think from my perspective, seeing in New Zealand, we really don't like to fail, and we really struggle with that idea of admitting failure. So from what I'm hearing from that, this is the ability to actually go, hey, what's a few ideas? How do we actually just get them off the ground and actually do it versus talking about it and kind of spending all of the time and effort that you can going through a committee of, spending a lot of money on investing in it, invest in it small, test it out, go for it.
Test it, experiment. I think the other thing is that, one thing I found listening to them is that it's not a humans are kind of at the center of this, and we say that as a kind of the human in the loop kind of thing. But really, what they in terms of innovation, right? You're going to be replacing something that a human does to an extent, so it makes sense that they're involved if you're going to have a successful experiment. But more importantly is that you get everybody involved. And this is one of the really interesting takeaways I had from one of the talks there was that they create an AI team. They had an AI team within their company. I won't say the organization, but they cycle out the people in the team. So they're not just
that's interesting.
They're not just tech people. So they may have an AI experiment team that is 6 seats, and maybe a tech person, a product person, marketing, HR. Right, but they swap those people out for every single project, so it means you never have the same perspective. And what that avoids, and what they said, and this was their experience, was that if you just have the innovation team, you end up creating AI ivory towers where people just experiment in isolation without ever exposing those to the outside team. And so what ends up happening is you have long cycles of innovation and development where tech teams just work in isolation on toys, but they don't actually ever expand it out, and
they're not thinking about how it will work in the real world. It's kind of talking about the best technology or the newest technology or whatever it might be, and trying to apply it to a problem versus the other way around.
Yeah, and there are things like when you expand it out into the wider organization, things that weren't a concern like security and safety are a much bigger issue. When you're just trialing in a small kind of POC environment or an experiment, it's not you don't really take those things into account. You just consider if it works, not whether or not there are safety or data or security issues or whatever it might be. But yeah.
There were a lot of exhibitors, and part of the reason why we started up being AI in the first place was the noise. So for our customers, they are almost getting analysis paralysis. And I've spoken about this so many times, but how did you decide where and what to go to and why?
Yeah, I think so. For me, what I focused on was thankfully they made it easy. So AI4, because of the amount of exhibitors, the amount of people talking, the amount of panels, topics, they separate them into industry tracks or cross-industry tracks. So for me, I tried to choose ones that, in terms of what we want to do and making ourselves useful to New Zealand and Australia, we're looking at things that kind of cross a lot of industries, right? Because there are no single industries here that are leading massively in AI. There are large players in multiple industries who are well positioned. So for me, it was really important to be industry agnostic.
Yeah.
And I looked for things that were, focused on ROI, on governance, on safety, and then actual more practical talks about how do you set up your data strategy correctly? How do you align your organizational culture? How do you get buy-in from execs? How do you, or if you're an exec, how do you get buy-in from your organization?
Yeah,
right?
Because that was one of the ones you came back with going, there's a lot of talk about the ROI across these AI projects.
Absolutely.
And we're seeing that through all of the media at the moment.
Yeah.
Hey, a lot of these AI projects are failing because they aren't looking at it from a productization basis. They aren't looking at the longer term impacts that you're talking about right there. How did you, or what did you hear at the event in terms of that approach around ROI?
Yeah, so the approach for ROI, and I think one thing that was quite, when you go to the US, you kind of expect it to all be about P&L, right?
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways it is, but I think my biggest takeaway the biggest takeaway for me in terms of ROI was actually that when you is looking beyond the kind of bottom line. Right. And understanding that the ROI cycles are going to, for AI, are longer than just your cost cycles and your budget cycles at the end of the year. And that's quite hard. If you're a CTO or your CEO trying to justify it to your CFO, right, and they're looking at your numbers and saying, hey, we're expecting it to go into the black within 6 months. But you know for a fact it won't be in people's hands and it won't be making a difference for another 6 after that. So I think the biggest takeaway I had was really reframing timelines, but also reframing how you think about return, right? And it's not that, we don't think about like cloud transformation as having direct ROI, but it did fundamentally transform how our businesses operate and the kinds of businesses that were possible. And I think that's the same thing, or not the same thing, but it's the same approach, right? We're looking beyond, like, obviously, this is not to say we should ignore cost, right? And it was still a consideration. I think a lot of people were talking about how do you accommodate this change in operating model with traditional budget cycles or traditional ways of viewing return?
Well, it's because everyone's thinking that this is just a productivity tool, right? Rather than actually rethinking the entire business landscape. Yeah. So when it's just a productivity tool and you go, okay, this tool might replace 5 people's jobs, that's fine. That's one attribute. And that's where I think some of these projects are failing, because that is quite a short-term focus, where what we're talking about here is what is the long-term actual business process from start to finish.
Absolutely.
And how that's going to transform. And that takes time.
Takes time.
It's always going to take time.
Absolutely.
When we were actually having a bit of a group debrief about this, you spoke about how some of the terms that we're finding quite interesting and exciting here in New Zealand are kind of a given. And you spoke about, AI is something that they're doing right now over in the States or in Europe as well. I know agents were a big part of that, and having a discussion around sort of that whole multi-agent realm and the focus around agents. What was the common theme that you were starting to see around agents and LLMs, and tell us a little bit about that, because it was quite interesting hearing some of your insight on that.
Yeah, so I think one thing, we are just starting to talk about agents or a kind of multi-agent workflows and orchestration here in New Zealand, right? And they're kind of, it's a given over there that people are already starting to build those systems.
Yeah.
And so it was.
And you're talking about businesses, not actually tech companies. You're talking about
actual businesses,
traditional businesses, building their own LLMs and building agent workflows.
And one thing. And so you actually start to see some of the, not challenges, but considerations that I think maybe are hard to see when it's so far off, when you're only just thinking about AI and you're not even thinking about agents, right? And you can't even see what the implications of something that far. So it was really fascinating to see some of the frontier issues that I don't think we'd see anywhere else. So one of them, for example, was, let's talk about, say, there was one company who's a car insurer, and what they were doing with agents was they had a number of agents, but one of them was to extract, say, insurance details from customers and correspond with another agent that would help would be like an underwriter essentially for an insurance policy.
So you've got the agent that's working with the customers and it's specifically designed to perform that task and knows the best around that task.
Yeah, so so they've got this kind of separation of expertise, and one of the things is they were using RAG and vector-based search to kind of search through all the data. One really interesting thing that I hadn't really considered was, we use things like vector search, and the one that was searching for the agent that was searching for all these details. You never consider what you actually don't know what you're searching for. One of the big considerations, you don't know what you're ragging, if that makes sense. Like if you say,
I'm confused.
No. So take this. Do you know? And I'll ask this to anybody who has this. Do you know absolutely everything that's on your SharePoint? Or your drive?
No, and not even my own personal computer.
Exactly, right?
No chance.
And so how do you expect to define a good governance policy and good PII or what's the word? Anonymization of personalized data.
Yeah.
How do you expect to have that when you don't even know what's on your SharePoint and you're getting an AI to pull everything off it?
Gotcha. Okay.
Right.
And so is this around actually tuning the questions, or is this, everyone wants to play with the whole prompt engineering
this actually comes back to setting up your data infrastructure correctly.
Right, gotcha. Okay.
To make agent workflows possible. And so this particular company, they'd spent all of this money and all of this dev time deriving a really quite a novel agent workflow and building out all these systems and these connections and testing them extensively. And then what they were finding it was pulling information that it wasn't supposed to be doing.
Right.
And doing it, and it wasn't until they started doing that they realized they have all this stuff on their SharePoint. So is this accurate data versus inaccurate data? Is it kind of defining what? It's the same way. So it's less accurate and inaccurate. It wasn't necessarily that it was making the details. It was kind of muddying the output. But it was, just as you wouldn't give a particular staff member access to certain data.
Yeah.
They've given the agent similar access, but then it's like we don't actually know what's on there, and if we want it to perform well, surely it makes sense for it to have everything, and then we just add guardrails. But the guardrails don't stop and start with the agent itself, with the LLM. It actually starts with your data. So it was that kind of blew my mind. Like, thinking about it that way, I don't think anyone's actually run up against that issue in the real world like that.
Yeah, it's because everyone kind of goes, data lake, data, lake house,
well, this is
et cetera,
this is the other thing, right?
It's now, perhaps it's an AI tailored data lake.
And so this is the thing, the biggest trend I saw from all of the exhibitors that was they were all either data lake houses, data infrastructure, security, or ML ops based. It was all about how do we build system tools, or they were all essentially within the category of how do we build systems and tools and infrastructure to make agents possible.
How interesting, because we're still at stage one where we're going, hey, let's play with a chatbot.
Yeah, basically nobody was selling that. Nobody was selling a chatbot. Nobody was selling an LLM. No one was selling a specialized, fine-tuned LLM.
Because they've already tried that. They've already gone, okay, here's the challenges with that. Now we've actually got to think a little bit more inward into what our business is, and then also how do we get our data ready to be able to actually leverage this technology, leverage the agents. Because I think, it's quite well known in the tech world that it is moving to multi-agent workflows and whatever is next beyond that. But it is the act of how. It is the, how do you make sure that that data is right? How do you make sure it's governed? How do you make sure that it's able to be interacted with by an agent?
Totally. Yeah, there was one company I spoke to who was exhibiting, and they provide that kind of data anonymization and infrastructure for ML ops for large multinationals. So Coca-Cola, some of the national sport brands, so like in the NHL and NFL, for banks, for telcos in the United States. These companies that have massive data requirements. So to even begin thinking about this kind of thing requires the orchestration of a significant amount of data in a way that has, as well as complying with all of their privacy requirements.
Yeah.
So to even get to the conversation of we want to do things with agents, they need to do all this work. And so all of these companies are there to make this possible.
Can I ask a question though, chicken and egg, because this is a conversation we get a lot in New Zealand. Oh, I can't do AI because my data is not ready, which I'm not sure that's the answer either. So what is it? Is it data first? Is it AI first? Is it AI to get your data ready? Is it, how should customers be approaching that?
So I think it depends. I think firstly, you can run experiments now. And you can start initiatives now.
I feel like you need to, because that will highlight any of the challenges that you do have within your data anyway. So it's more of a learning exercise.
Yeah, and this is the other thing. One of the talks I went to was really emphasizing that you're not behind, and that yes, there is an urgency, there is a need.
Yeah.
But not to feel like you're behind because of the kind of, and it's that kind of, when you have an insurmountable problem, you kind of shy away from it. I think the great thing about AI projects is that you can start small and still see some sort of return and actually see value without having to scale it up. There are different considerations when you scale it up, which is, we talk about data, but you can still do those experiments now and actually see the appetite and get buy-in, and that'll make your life easier when you want to scale up. When you want to say, do a load of data cleanliness, you want to change all your infrastructure, you want to unify things, make things standardized, normalization, and you want to if you already have company buy-in, if you already have the culture aligned, if you already have an environment for experiments, it makes that easier, and it makes justifying that clearer. I think. I think one big thing is that, you know, these experiments, they don't have to be, you know, replace an entire person or do something completely new. It can be really, really small. So a good example, I saw an insurance a company that insures large trucks and HGVs on, you know, taking freight around the US, and they have kind of automated they have these cameras that ensure insurance compliance. So they need to make sure that certain things are happening with the car to make sure that the insurance policy is valid.
So it's protecting your business risk per se, as opposed to the quite common lens of productivity. It's looking at it from a risk element.
Absolutely, right? Because like if you're a bank, risk is your business. Your business is risk. And so
that can increase your profitability if you're decreasing your risk.
Absolutely. And so for them, they were able to just, they'd spent, you know, they'd had a mature kind of traditional computer vision approach where they have a camera sitting there and it automatically classifies if the driver isn't at the seat or isn't doing a certain thing. It's got a load of pitfalls and it still requires someone to come in. They just swapped that. They just, as an experiment, they swapped it out for a vision transformer, for an LLM, and it worked. I think it was something like 50% more accurate, which is
more accurate than the human.
Yeah, which was 80. Oh no, than their existing system.
Oh right.
And it was, which is 89.
Which was human augmented, I guess.
Yeah. So it flags up, and all it means is, you know, a policy agent is going to look at that at some point in time. It's not to actually enforce anything, but it's to make sure that things are being complied with. Anyway. It went from, when they were using the traditional system, it went from around 60% and it went all the way up to around 95% accuracy. Wow. And that was just an experiment they ran. They were like, well, let's just see. Let's see if it's possible and see if it works. Now, for them to scale that up across their entire operation, they're going to need to do a load of things. But the important takeaway for them is that this actually has real value and this is really useful. And this will let us offload a lot of the things that we were doing previously. Like when you do traditional computer vision, there's all of these ops that you have to set up. Whereas they were just able to outsource everything.
Interesting. Okay.
You know?
And this is something that, you know, again, we go back to sort of why being AI exists, and it's about that specialization in that niche, because AI is such a noisy world. It's hard for you as a researcher to even tap into a small percentage of what is out there at the moment, particularly when you go off to Vegas and there's that scale of an event happening and the pace in which it's happening. What was from a traditional business perspective, what business or brand did you see embracing AI the most? What was really interesting to you?
The US government.
The US government?
Yeah, it's not a business, but it is an organization.
Wow, really? So they are using AI over there?
Yeah, so not just the federal government, but state government. That was really fascinating. There's we look at, so there was someone from, there was a really great panel I went to that was on, you know, AI in government, sorry. And you had there was a cross section of different people. There was somebody from the San Bernardino County office, and what they were doing to kind of completely change, and then and the changes they were making. You know, we think about local government, we don't really think data mature, but this is San Bernardino County. They're like 3 hours from Silicon Valley, so like,
you kind of expect it.
So it means that, you know, you have an environment where there are people who are willing and have the skills and the mindset and the appetite to do change within local government. So they were doing it, and seeing what was possible in local government was really fascinating. And actually, you know, it's perfectly possible to provide guardrails for these kinds of things.
Well, I see government as just being largely process driven, right? There's so much
process
within their organisations. So being able to leverage AI kind of makes sense. So much policy, so much writing, so much text, right?
Everything from using OCR to process to move all of their paper forms, you know, and this is the US, right? So everything's paper. So moving from being able to do that to actually, you know, from building chatbots to internal RAG-based vector search, everything, and like seeing a government agency with the willingness and the appetite to do that, right, and say like, hey, why not?
And did they talk about the security? I know that's one thing that's constantly referred to.
Right. Well, one of the things is that, you know, they were able to they have a number of there's a number of tools they have in place to be able to assure that. So they chose, they made sure to choose services or out-of-the-box solutions that offered virtual private cloud, and had a high degree of confidence that was possible, and for a small subset of things, they brought things on-prem, but the large majority of stuff they felt perfectly comfortable to be able to audit. And again, this is legislative requirements in California. Is different.
Without a doubt.
So I think for them it was, okay, what's the real risk here? Like actually sit down, aside from complying with laws, what's the real risk? And they actually assessed that, well, the risk is that we don't do anything.
Well, the risk is possibly somebody smashes your window and takes that data anyway.
Exactly.
Versus the more rare fact of somebody actually getting into your cloud environment.
And not just them, but the US DoD, the Department of Defense. So on that panel was someone from so we had, there was somebody from the US Coast Guard, and there was somebody from the US Air Force. And the rep from the US Air Force was saying they were using an AI-powered scheduler to automatically schedule fighter pilots for F-18s.
Yeah, okay.
Right, and so so
that would be around skill profiling. That will be around
everything.
Location, stress levels,
everything. So absolutely all these unstructured qualitative factors, and using them to derive correct scheduling for when F-18 pilots can fly. And what's great, and we think about the US DoD and the military as having the tightest requirements, but actually they were able to set up an environment where it was perfectly confident, and a specific use case where they didn't have to expose it to all the information.
No.
And they're quite experienced at doing this kind of thing, and they have...
they know the data sets that they need to tune the model to be able to do what it needs to do.
Exactly.
And they keep it safe and secure.
And they also had a really specific outcome. They had a really specific output.
Yeah.
Right?
So is this really the answer to a lot of this? It is that having that outcome that you're seeking towards, or that problem statement, and being very clear on what that problem statement is, and not necessarily just throwing AI at it, but having a look at the whole life cycle around what that constitutes. What is the data? Where is it? And how is it accessible? All the way through to how is that data then going to be leveraged at the front end of the user?
Absolutely, yeah. And then, it's always kind of been a fact that you can't chase innovation, right? You just have to chase problems and hope that innovations can solve it. And I think that was probably the biggest takeaway, was seeing all these companies doing all these things, and plenty of them willing to share their failings. And
that's interesting.
Share where they failed, and often it was they failed a good couple times before they got something really correct.
Right.
And they had a real big, or what they call a nail it and scale it.
Yeah.
And most of those failures were trying to chase a shiny thing, trying to chase the innovation rather than looking at, and often trying to solve a problem that was too big.
But perhaps that's when innovation's been driven from the tech company or the tech teams rather than the business. So I see that a lot, right?
Yeah.
Rather than working with the actual business stakeholders themselves, it is an IT team making decisions for the business. So how we can actually bring the business along the journey in terms of understanding what the art of the possible is, and that there is a challenge to the status quo in the way that people are doing things. We've got some workshops coming up with some customers around that. How do we help customers understand where AI can be used, but not just throw AI at it? It's not the Band-Aid to absolutely everything.
Yeah, and I think, within organizations outside of just the kind of IT and digital spheres and digital teams, people are close to, have high proximity to problems that are worth solving, and they're often really mundane problems. And this isn't just like automate this workflow or rag this and then put a chatbot in front of it. It's often stuff like OCR. Yeah, and it's the chain. It's the chain of all of these things together. These smaller individual problems that each make up a larger problem.
So what's being done a lot in your business that takes time or is process heavy or people heavy, focusing on those, which isn't necessarily going to be this really cool, amazing application that's going to do all these shiny things.
Yeah, and also just why not? Why wouldn't it be possible? Well, why can't we change it? I think that's the attitude you almost have to approach it with, is is firstly, don't look at something that's too big, right? Don't try and bite off more than you can chew and say, here's one single product for everything, right?
Yeah.
But also don't write something off because you think, oh, well, it's just how we do it. It's quick. So,
Adopt things like my 3-year-old. Why?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
Why? Try and find an answer. Try and find a way.
Absolutely.
Usually there is a way, right? Cool. Well, that was really insightful. I think we're going to have another session once your brain starts to ingest,
Settle
and
down.
digest, and because I know that was a really big week for you, and I really appreciate you going over and bringing those insights back to our team and also to our customers. Well, thank you. That was awesome.
No
I think we're
worries.
going to have to run another session because
Absolutely.
I know that there was a lot to digest over the last week, and you've come back into an entirely full week. So thank you. What do you think, just before we do wrap, would be the biggest area that New Zealand can take from some of the learnings that you had over there?
Yeah, I think, like we said before, like fail fast and fail early, but I think, if you don't already have a small cross-functional team, and when I say cross-functional, I don't mean in the software sense, I mean in the literally take people from your organization who do not have anything to do with IT or AI, pick maybe one person who does, and just start a team. And you don't need to build something, but just start thinking. Spend a week and go away and think, because the one thing I found time and time again, whether it was small or medium business, large organization, enterprise, government, it pretty much started like that.
Yeah,
right. It started with a small number of people just asking, what could we do?
Yeah, and we know that for one of these successful products or projects or proof of concepts or prototypes, you need a cross-functional team in terms of the experts from an AI perspective.
Of course.
AI products, AI engineers, AI researchers like yourself,
Absolutely.
because there is so much out there and it is moving so quickly. Amazing. Well, I'm looking forward to hearing more. I think that you will start to bring some of these trends into some of the content that we'll be developing moving forward, and some of the products that we're starting to build at Being. I'm really looking forward to seeing how we can work with our customers around these innovation workshops, but also the actual execution of AI, and actually help get businesses moving. Because I think from what I'm hearing here, if we just keep putting this off and seeing how things are going to pan out, we're going to start to see a lot of interruption and disruption from overseas.
Absolutely.
And we need to fly our flag over here. Yeah. So, and that's part of the reason why we like to send you to these events, because it's great to see what is happening on the world stage. So to those of you that are listening, thank you for coming along and listening to what we have to say today. Reach out if you want to discuss any of these thoughts, and if you're wanting to have an ideation session, workshop, or have us as part of your team, we'd love to talk.
And
Thanks,
bring your problems.
Bring your problems.
Bring your problems. Always.
I've got a lot of problems.
Yeah, I don't bring, not all your problems, but bring your problems.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
You have to use that part.